Coming up this week on the St. Paul Forum, I'll be speaking with Dr. Artika Tyner, Professor of Law at the University of St. Thomas. That's all this week on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. With me today is Dr. Artika Tyner, Professor of Law at the University of St. Thomas. Welcome, Artika.
Thank you, John.
Now,
I'm glad to be here.
30 seconds ago, I learned that you grew up in this town. Tell me about growing up here, because you went not that many miles, but you've had a very interesting arc to get to be a professor of law.
Yes, I was born and raised in St. Paul. I grew up in the historic Rondo area, so it's been a community that's deeply rooted and supportive of my work, so I've been blessed to be a part of that community and to have the honor to still work and live there today. As far as my family roots, they go back at least 3 generations in the St. Paul neighborhood where I live today. And more importantly, I think it's an opportunity to look at how I can serve in my community and how I can give back to the so many others who contributed to my success today.
And you went to college and law school where?
Well, the funny story is for college.
I knew we'd get to a funny story right at the start.
I didn't go too far. Most of my academic career was on Snelling Avenue. I'm a graduate of Highland Park Senior High School, and then I went just right down the road near the fairgrounds to Hamline University. And that's where I earned a degree in English and conflict studies. And then I ventured to the big city of Minneapolis to pursue my law degree. That was one of my first times downtown before orientation to get acclimated to the city of Minneapolis.
Okay. And what did you do right after law school? Did you go into some kind of practice? Because the arc of being a law professor that seems like a fast track to me.
After college, I actually had a year off, and that was an opportunity for me to work in banking. So I worked in U.S. Bank, and that gave me an opportunity to develop my core analytical skills and some skills in business management as well. So that laid a firm foundation for my studies in law school. And after that year, because I completed college within 3.5 years, I spent that time just preparing and learning more from other lawyers. So volunteering in the community, shadowing lawyers to find out what the practice of law was like. I knew I wanted a law degree and it would be important to me because I believe the law is a language of power. And I knew that within my community, many had felt that they were disenfranchised. So I thought, how could I use my legal training then to make a difference?
And where along the way did you realize you wanted to be a teacher?
It started very early on, I think, in the sense of just teaching my own nieces and nephews and learning new skills and wanting to share them with others. So that's when I pursued education studies in college and actually had a pivotal or defining moment in college where in doing my student teaching, I was in a kindergarten classroom, and it became apparent to me at that point that I had to do something related to law and policy because there were children who didn't have a meal to start the day with or were looking for or uncertain of where they would live after school. So I said to myself, in order for each child to have an equal playing field related to the success of their education, their basic needs had to be met. And that's actually what compelled me to think about law.
So you have taught at the kindergarten level and the graduate school level.
Yes.
Would something in the middle, 7th, 8th grade, is that almost unmanageable?
I'm not sure, actually. I did some work at the middle school level teaching at the Science Museum and the Sciences and Arts, but full range of teaching as a passion and as a gift.
Okay. So from law school to teaching at St. Thomas, was there other kinds of practice en route there, or did you go right to law school? I mean, right to the profession?
I went right to the profession of teaching in the sense that I was appointed as a clinical law fellow in 2006 and had been groomed over the years as well from my mentor, Professor Nakima Levy-Pounds. She's actually the founder of the Community Justice Project. So she had taught me about teaching pedagogy, about scholarly research, and all of the tools to be effective as an educator in a legal setting. So I credit that to her as well.
Okay, now I can bluff my way through the word pedagogy, but most people can't. What do you mean by pedagogy?
As in the sense of teaching, curriculum development, and also the values of what makes you unique as an educator. So when I talk about pedagogy, I think of it in a sense of what's unique and personal to me, the value of teaching, using education as a tool to empower others to lead within their sphere of influence, and more importantly, to use their legal education as a tool for social change.
Okay, so tell me about your current role at the University of St. Thomas Law School.
Currently, I wear two hats, so I have two roles. First, as clinical law faculty and teaching in the Community Justice Project, which is a civil rights clinic. And second, I also serve as Director of Diversity. So within that role, I'm responsible for ensuring that our community is inclusive and welcoming to all students from diverse backgrounds.
Okay. Tell me about the Community Justice Project. That's the big initiative, isn't it?
Yes. The Community Justice Project was founded in 2007. It was actually a part of a sense of a journey for me in finding my own identity of what type of professional that I wanted to be and what areas of law I was passionate about. Once again, the director of our program, Professor Levy Pounds, and I had traveled to South Africa, to Durban and Johannesburg. And one of the things that we did is we were looking to present our research on how do you train law students in a social justice lawyering model? How do you go beyond just saying we're going to help you develop some practical skills to the point of saying that you can be a social engineer, that you can use your legal training to help effectuate change within your community, and that you could use it to empower communities. So she and I presented a joint proposal, so we had the opportunity to present our research at two conferences, and out of that, it was very eye-opening of what could we do that could really enhance and better the conditions of marginalized populations here back home. So literally, the Community Justice Project, we wrote the framework on napkins on South Africa Air, and we said, we're gonna be different. How? By teaching social justice lawyering, social engineering, and more importantly, that everything would be within a leadership framework. Because one of the things that Dr. King said, and is a powerful quote that I just keep in my remembrance as a motivation, is that he refused to believe that a man could not influence the unfolding events surrounding him. So as I looked at that, I said, we have to train our students in leadership. That way they could use their influence, which with a legal training, it's automatically presumed that we'll be leaders. So how can you use that legal training to make a difference in our community? So that was kind of that Gandhi-inspired moment. How can you be the change you wish to see in the world?
Now, what do you mean by our communities? I mean, this is essentially a variety of ethnicities, age ranges, gender issues, handicap ability kind of things as well. And geographically, it's the metro, it's the 5-state area. You're just changing the world, aren't you?
Well, that's quite the task, but I say that in the sense of what we do in the Community Justice Project, the projects present themselves out of the community. So when I say out of the community, it's not us jumping on the scenes to say, hey, we're super lawyers, whatever issue, we're here to resolve it. But truly, all the projects that we've worked on have been based upon an invitation from the community. And those issues have ranged from working on re-entry to disparities in the juvenile justice system, the school to prison pipeline. It's over the years since 2007, it's been a full gamut of issues. So when I say our community, for me personally, that also includes a global community, and we built global partnerships and have helped to support the founding of other community justice projects in Nigeria and South Africa as well. But primarily the issues are centrally focused on civil rights and human rights issues in the arenas of education, criminal law, juvenile law, and economic development.
Okay. So I was kind of under the impression that you're teaching lawyers to go out and find these problems and solve them, but it sounds like the students themselves are actually spending a great deal of time in public service projects.
They are, yes. I encourage our students when I talk to them just right away in orientation to give them a sense that they're here to serve. So in that way, when community members have a legal issue that presents itself, that they're bringing those issues to the table and that the lawyers are working in the process of helping to facilitate social change. So just changing a frame of reference of how the lawyer sees themselves as a part of a process and a contributor to a process within a community setting.
Okay. There was a major project a few years ago, and it may still be ongoing, about the death row project. I can't remember, it's like out of Illinois or something like that, overturned half the death row cases there. Is that kind of a similar thing in a different area? I'm bringing up something
Sure.
I didn't do any prep on this.
Not to worry. Yeah. In the sense of Those types of clinic primarily work on litigation-based,
Okay.
and our work is more in the public policy arena, because previously we were a family law clinic, which was litigation-based, but our work is really related to systemic change. So if you look at some of our signature product or work projects, it has been looking at how do we change policies that impact local communities, both here in the city of St. Paul and also in the state and also nationally.
Okay, when you say a family law clinic, that's a clinic inside the school?
Well, in the sense of clinics, it's something that's within the school that serves as an apprenticeship or internship for our second and third year law students. And under the supervision of both myself or other clinical faculty, the students work under our professional licenses to serve clients.
Okay. What kind of projects is the CJP currently working on?
Well, currently I'm supervising a project related to the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice, and actually that campaign is unfolding as we speak. The FCC will be voting on a proposal related to lowering the cost of prison phone calls on August 9th, so that's an upcoming date to save the date for. But the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice is really about bringing regulation to an industry, which is the prison phone industry, that has not been regulated. So if we just take this from the national scale of the FCC's work down to where we are here in the state of Minnesota. In the state of Minnesota, a 15-minute phone call costs about $15 to $17. And if you look at the cost of that phone call and you compare it to an international call or any call services, you can see that that's astronomical. And more importantly, you can also see that it creates the barriers for families to remain in contact with their loved ones who are incarcerated. So in looking at that, we've had the opportunity to help shed light on the issue. Also in the state of Minnesota, there's about 15,000 children who have an incarcerated parent. So then that begs the question, how can those children remain in contact with their parents when most folks who are incarcerated over 100 miles from home? So we really think it's a social justice issue related to access to communication, which is a fundamental human right in that sense. So we're looking to move forward with that campaign in the sense of promoting strong communities and also strong families. So that has brought our students into the advocacy role of conducting research about the impact of the high cost of prison phone calls. And more importantly, as I said, our work being not litigation-based but related to systemic change, lending our voices to what the future could be to ensure that families can remain connected.
When you look at systemic change, there are always vested interests that have the desire to thwart and often have the power to thwart. Because somebody was getting that $1 a minute, running the phone booth at the prisons. How do you take them on? I mean, they're going to fight back in a certain way, aren't they?
Of course. I think any time that you're engaging in some type of systemic change, that there's a challenge. But I think a part of it is the sense of how do you build coalitions, raise awareness, and get community members who are directly impacted to have an opportunity to share about how the particular challenge has influenced them in particular. Because I think that if we look at any type of social change movement in history, it definitely was about getting community members informed and engaged and igniting their ability to take action.
In case you're just joining us, this is the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. With me today is Dr. Artika Tyner, Professor of Law at the University of St. Thomas. And Dr. Tyner, you are also the Director of Diversity. How do you serve the community within that capacity?
Well, primarily within my role of Director of Diversity, it's an opportunity to raise awareness about the need for more diversity in our profession. So that focuses on pipelining initiatives, which means getting young people involved to think about, could I possibly be an attorney? What does being an attorney truly mean? But also it's been an opportunity to engage with community partners to promote diversity here within the Twin Cities. A couple recent examples that I'll share is our work with the Minnesota African American Museum. We worked on a project this past year to help raise awareness and to share about the history of the 150th anniversary of Emancipation Proclamation, and to also bring it down to looking at, for Minnesota specifically, what role did Minnesotans play in that history. So one of the things that we were able to do was help to publish a manual that focused on watch night services. And just for those of you who may not be familiar with what watch night services are, they actually took place for the first time on the eve of the Emancipation Proclamation. So this year, December 31st, this past year of 2012, marked the 150th anniversary. So it's an opportunity where former slaves and slaves came together to pray for their freedom and the strength to endure the ramifications of some of the challenges that they were facing. So that's just one example of how we used our research capabilities to support a glimpse of history.
Okay. When people think of diversity in academia, generally they think about admissions policy. Is that a major portion of your job, or is that just one little bit of it?
Actually, my role related to admissions policies is primarily on supporting some of the pipelining initiatives that I had talked about earlier. So my role is pretty limited in the sense of, as I said, that wearing two hats. It's primarily related to serving our students once they matriculate into our program. So once they're admitted, to make sure that they can be as successful as possible academically. And then second, to move us beyond our four walls, to engage community members. Like I gave the example of working with the Minnesota African American Museum or the International Leadership Institute, Judge Lang's nonprofit, is an opportunity to bring folks into our community, to embrace them, and more importantly, to use our legal training and skills to leverage to work on some of the issues that they're partnering with as well.
Okay. What other ways are you involved in the community? I know there's a plethora of them.
Well, primarily I serve on two nonprofit boards, the first one being the Children's Defense Fund, Minnesota. So I serve on that board and primarily looking at some of the efforts related to community engagement. But more importantly, I really admire the work of the Children's Defense Fund in helping to raise awareness related to children's rights issues. So I have to tell you, in all full disclosure, Marian Wright Edelman is my shero. In that sense, as the founder of CDF, and looking at her work and raising awareness about the challenges that children face and using the resources of CDF to bring about social change. And the one publication that sits proudly on my desk is their report of From the Cradle to the Prison Pipeline, and looking at some of the barriers that young people face in the context of mass incarceration and some of the pipelines into the web of mass incarceration. So I believe one of the quotes that she has that inspires me is, "Service is the rent that we pay to be living in society." So that's inspired all of my other board work, all of the work and service in the community.
Well, tell me more about the cradle to prison pipeline. That's a phrase that's been around, what, about 10 years, something like that?
About.
And is it referring specifically to an ethnic population? Is it referring to a demographic population? Maybe both. Yeah.
Well, I think both, in the sense of an ethnic population. It was one of the first comprehensive reports to identify some of the racial disparities that we see in the juvenile justice system. And looking at the fact that, for instance, a black boy born in the early 2000s would have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison or being incarcerated during his lifetime. So it started to shed light on some of the racial disparities that we were seeing in this larger web of mass incarceration, with over 2 million people incarcerated here in the United States. But when you mentioned the latter piece of demographic, it also looked at some of the barriers related to socioeconomics that goes across the board. And I should tell you, on my Marian Wright Edelman little sidebar, is that Marian Wright Edelman actually led Dr. King's last campaign, which was the Poor People's Campaign. Mm-hmm. So in looking at her work, the Children's Defense Fund is almost the fruits of her labor, in the sense of also looking at the barriers that children living in poverty also face. So that same phrase about that cradle to prison pipeline looks at everything from healthcare disparities to access to education, and also the juvenile justice system of being entangled in that web. So I think it's a comprehensive report. And also they have updates for state by state. So I encourage people, anytime I talk to folks that are interested in the type of work that I do, is to look at and use that report as a resource.
Just the metaphor of a pipeline makes it seem almost impossible to get out. But it's almost more like a restricted access highway. There's a couple of off-ramps, but they're very hard to get. And it seems like a lot of social justice work would be in getting people to recognize avenues that are available to them and actually strengthen those avenues so that they're not just little tiny off-ramps.
Well, in the sense of, I had the same challenge. It's like, if there's a pipeline, it's only going in one direction. But I think the image the CDF clearly sets is that we can dismantle that pipeline by raising awareness, and more importantly, by building coalitions. Because sometimes I think we do social justice work in silos. Say, here's the faith community, here's the attorneys, here's the social workers. But I think one of the things that I've loved about CDF, that they bring us all together. I had the opportunity to attend their national conference, and I stayed on the faith communities track because I wanted to know how I could integrate more of my work into my local faith community. And then I said, let me leave for a little bit. Then I jumped on the lawyers track and educators track. So I think it's would have to be a comprehensive approach. But I think we also have to look at it, the systemic challenges facing mass incarceration in that pipeline. And the metaphor that I use is that it's more of a web. Because we look at a web, there's a lot of ways to get tangled in that web. But once again, as you stated, what are some of those exit points versus the many entry points? And I think a part of it is to dismantle the system that even would lead to a creation of a pipeline or that web.
How long have you been involved with the Children's Defense Fund?
The Children's Defense Fund, I fell in love with in law school.
Right like that. It's great. Yeah.
So since at least 2004, 2005, I've been following their research and history. I was appointed to their board a year ago, but have been actively involved with CDF's work since 2006 formally.
You, in addition to being a teacher, have just completed being a student fairly recently, hence the PhD, Dr. Tyner. Tell us about your graduate school and what sort of things you worked on there.
Well, the doctoral program was, once again, another defining moment. It was an opportunity for me to explore research related to an issue that I was passionate about. And of course, from everything I said, it would be social justice. So when picking my opportunity to conduct research, I focused on the role of lawyers as leaders. So my research question was, what are the leadership characteristics of lawyers who engage in social change work? And the second part of my question focused on how do they do the work that they do? So what tools do they use to build and sustain social change? So I used my doctoral studies as an opportunity to enhance my knowledge related to how to do my work more effectively. So to be honest, it was more like a professional development opportunity.
Yes, yeah.
So I had the honor of interviewing 4 participants, one being Dr. Agar Khan, who founded Time Bank USA, but also was a pioneer in the civil rights movement. I also founded Antioch Law School, one of the first law schools that was focused on social justice, and served as a speechwriter in the Kennedy administration. I could go on and on about Dr. Khan for hours, but just being able to interview someone who's so integral to the success of the civil rights movement. And I also had the opportunity to interview Bonnie Allen from the Mississippi Center for Justice. She was one of the first attorneys on the ground and doing work post Hurricane Katrina to help set up access to legal services. And then also John Powell from the Kirwan Institute and the founder of the Institute on Race and Poverty here at the U of M. And finally, the director of my program, Nikema Levy-Pounds of the Community Justice Project. So amongst the 4 of them, I was able to get new insights on what is the role of lawyers. And what came of that, and my conclusion was this essence of planting people, growing justice, that the lawyers that I interviewed had played a key role in being planters of seeds of change. And the byproduct of that was growing justice in the communities that they served.
So earlier you mentioned that there were 2 things you were looking at. One is the characteristics of effective leaders, yes, and the other is the tools they use. So let's just take those one at a time. What are the characteristics of lawyers who become effective social change leaders?
Primarily, I put them into 2 categories for leadership characteristics. First being leadership is about relationships, building relationships one-on-one, engaging others, but more importantly, helping them to unveil their leadership capabilities. Because what I discovered is amongst all my 4 participants in different roles and settings, sometimes they were the leader, sometimes they were the follower, and sometimes those roles simply blurred together. They were just there to be a part of a process. And then secondly, that leadership was about behavior, that they had certain characteristics, and primarily related to servant leadership, which was coined by Robert K. Greenleaf, in the sense of seeking to serve, that was the reason why they had chosen to lead. And for some, leadership had found them based upon their own passion or catalytic moment or experience, that leadership had compelled them to move forward. And then for the tools portion, I know you asked for the latter portion of it, how do they do what they do? I was very curious, and what I found was that they were using unconventional ways to navigate the process of civil rights and human rights, because traditional opportunities for litigation in the civil rights arena were not readily available, depending upon what type of issues that they were working on. But instead of saying, oh, there's nothing I can do, I think each of them really said and looked in their hands and said, what can I do to make a difference in the world? And that was through public policy advocacy, creating nonprofits and social enterprises, and also engaging in communities in the sense of empowering others to lead.
Okay. We do want to make sure to get up your website, the Community Justice Project website.
Yes.
And is it top of mind right now? I know we were going to look it up before. We'll make sure to put it up in superimposition. So you have a long career ahead of you. You're a young woman. What do you plan on doing how long are you going to do this, and how much do you hope it will be able to grow?
That's a good question. I think in the sense of I take it day by day. Sometimes I tease my students and I say the dean doesn't know I shouldn't be getting paid to do the work that I love. This isn't really working. But in reality, I think it's something that I will continue on in the sense of as long as there's civil rights issues that I'm passionate about and that I can have influence related to, I'll definitely continue this type of work in one way or another. And lastly, I would say in the sense of education, you can see from the journey that I already talked about, I've always had a passion for teaching, and I believe that my work and with students will be able to give me a kind of a living legacy in a sense, that my students will continue to move on, whether they become a corporate partner in a large law firm or go to work at legal aid, that they all have this sense of consciousness of that they can use their law degree to make a difference.
Okay, so you are spending a great deal of time blending the practical with the ideal.
Yes.
Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask you a question with kind of like two aspects to it. Okay. And that is, what has been the most successful thing you've done so far, or the most satisfying, even if it's only partially successful?
I think the most satisfying and successful work was bringing the community together related to Brotherhood, Inc. Brotherhood, Inc. is a nonprofit that focuses on providing reentry and reintegration services to African American young males who either have had contact with the justice system or who are at risk. And the reason why I say it was a success, because it was something that came out of concerns from the community in saying that we have a lot of young men who need a job, who need an opportunity to get back on track, and also that they could be great ambassadors in the community and help to serve in the community. So out of that, we had the opportunity with our law students to build a nonprofit. So we had law students who traveled to Homeboy Industries in LA, which was founded by a Jesuit priest, Father Gregory Boyle, with the same goal for Latino young men to offer them an opportunity to get back on track and to contribute to their communities. So one of the things that Father Gregory Boyle said is, nothing stops a bullet like a job. So we got a sense of, how can we make a difference? How can we address gang violence? How can we address disenfranchisement? And it's jobs. So I would be remiss if I didn't do a little Brotherhood commercial, in the sense of the young men who are employed through Brotherhood also have a social enterprise called Brotherhood Brew, where they sell a wide range of organic coffee products. And through their earnings through Brotherhood Brew, that's how we're able to sustain the nonprofit, and more importantly, to ensure that the young men are able to earn a livable wage. So I think when I see each one of those young men, puts a smile on my face to know that we could use our legal training to not only create the nonprofit, but more importantly, to fully engage the community in a service that they needed. So I think that would be one of the highlights for me.
Well, Dr. Tyner, we are out of time, but it's been fantastic talking to you. You are doing noble work. Thank you for your community service.
Thank you for having me.
I've been speaking to Dr. Artika Tyner, Professor of Law at the University of St. Thomas, on this week's St. Paul Forum. We hope to see you again next week.